me yammering. Let's hear from some of our fantastic speakers today. 2 this year. It's a lucky year. Sammy and I got to meet Bill Samuels this past March, just about an hour before being arrested with him. It's an interesting way to meet someone, and I really encourage that all of you try it sometime soon. He approached us just before the protest around the Capitol really got underway. Humble and unassuming, he didn't mention all the great work he was involved in helping to make. He was helping make happen in the state. Instead, he told us he was from Canandaigua and how much he loved Rochester. He didn't mention that in 1971 he helped fund the Vietnam veterans against the war march on Washington. He didn't mention that he helped to found the Council on Economic Priorities, which helped keep the public informed on corporate business practices for over 30 years. He didn't mention how instrumental he was in the 2008 Democratic takeover of the New York State Senate. There were some pretty powerful things he did say, however. He had some choice words for Governor Governor Cuomo. Holding back greatly, he said that Governor Cuomo has been a disappointment and an embarrassment. That Cuomo should run as a Republican, and finally, that rising poverty and inequality are the biggest economic issues in our state, and Andrew ignores them with diabolical delight. Shortly after making these statements, Bill Samuels was arrested along with 58 others in an act of civil disobedience at the governor's office. Obviously, we felt we really needed to hear what he had to say. So please join me in welcoming Bill Samuels.
I'll tell you, to join that troublemaker is a real honor for me. Now, first, I want to thank and recognize our 2 award recipients today. I talked to Paula. I even thought years ago, because I'm probably older than Paula, that we actually dated. But I have to tell you, for those of us that are older, to still be here fighting the good fight, it's a real honor to join your honorees and be here tonight. Now, I want to thank Luis Torres, but in particular, I want to thank your wife for bringing you to Rochester. And Nikisha, what can I say? It's hard to be the speaker before you, because I've heard you before, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Sammy, where's Sammy?
Right here.
I'll tell you what an enthusiastic young woman that is. I'll come here any day she is. I am proud to be home. I once lived on Beverly Street until they exiled me for being too liberal to Canandaigua. And the last time I was in this place was not as joyous as tonight, because it was my uncle's funeral and they held it here in this beautiful temple, so I'm much happier tonight than I was then. But I want to start tonight by quoting Colin O'Malley. O'Malley, is that right? I'm old. Wait a minute, I'm confused. Wait a minute, no, I mean Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky said, and history is a relay of revolutions. And that is true. Today's social action must absorb the lessons of yesterday's revolutions. So I'm going to bore you a little with the view of an upstate New Yorker who's older and participated in those yesterday revolutions, and is proud to be here with Sammy and Colin and all the rest of you in today's revolutions. So let's look back. In 1964, I thought between 64 and 72, we had won all the social justice issues. It was over. We had nothing more to fight for. Not true, unfortunately. But in 64, as I was a young man in Canandaigua, the first major riots of social unrest occurred right here in Rochester. Okay? The National Guard was called out. Alinsky called Rochester the southern plantation transported to the north. A classic company town owned lock, stock, and barrel by Kodak. Well, that's not sort of true today. We have different issues. But that's what it was like in 1964. I was here. At that time, Reverend Franklin Florence formed FIGHT with 400 dues-paying, mainly white liberals. Sound familiar? Sound familiar because we're still here fighting that fight. It was freedom, integration, God, honor, and today. And those words of 1964 are as relevant today as they were in 1964. From that spark, Metro Justice was born, and today is still fighting for economic equality. I congratulate you. The need is as great as ever. In 1960, as I said, I really thought we'd won. We stood up against the Vietnam War. We passed historic civil rights legislation. But we made one big mistake that we must own. And it's counterintuitive, and I'll tell you what it is. After John Kerry lost the presidential election, and as Colin mentioned, I had played a major role and raised the money for the Vietnam Veterans March in Washington, I tried to figure out, how did we get here? I mean, I had a victory lap in 1972. Why are we still here? And what I discovered was quite simple, okay? We were naive in our movement. We forgot what Adlai Stevenson said in the 1956 Democratic presidential election. He said, "The idea that you can merchandise candidates for high office like breakfast cereal is the ultimate indignity to the democratic process." He forewarned us of the danger of money in politics. We didn't listen when we took to the streets. In 1968, we shouted, "Power to the people." Hubert Humphrey won the Democratic presidential nomination. But let me ask you a question. Colin, where are you? How many primaries did Hubert Humphrey run in to get the presidential nomination? Just run in. Take a guess. None. He didn't run in one. Neither did Adlai Stevenson in 1952. We forgot that our country, which was formed in rebellion against England, we inherited a system that was quasi-parliamentarian. The Prime Minister of Great Britain is not elected by the people. He's chosen by the elite, by the power brokers. That's what they do. And in 1968, there were primaries, but 80% of the vote was super voting, the pros. And we demonstrated against that. I led a lawsuit against Larry O'Brien, Power to the People, and we switched it to be 80% primaries and 20% super voting, and we shouted, "Joy, we won." And we opened the door to money state by state to presidential primaries. We made a mistake. We didn't think out campaign finance reform in 1968. And instead, after that great convention, where either my conservative brother, that's what I call him, was arrested, and he supported Goldwater. I mean, what can I say? We formed the McGovern-Fraser Commission, and that's where we changed the current presidential process. It's an horrendous process. Let's go to New York. I was honored to have a wonderful man as my father, Howard Samuels, who ran for governor so many times I can't even count that high. But he was a good man. And I want to ask a question. Where is Sammy? Sammy, when did we allow women in the Democratic Party a primary for governor vote. When did we let you have the franchise?
Wow, this is embarrassing. I should know.
Take a guess.
72.
My God, she's right almost. I can't believe it. The fact is, 1970. And it's a trick question. New York didn't have primaries for governor and the Senate. We let the wise men vote like we did in Parliament. We went to conventions in Syracuse and Buffalo, and we nominated the candidates. And people like myself demonstrated power to the people. Out with Meade Esposito. I'd say out with the Wilmots, but I hear that they're still very active in the party and very good people, so I probably shouldn't say that. But the fact is, we did. And in Rochester, New York, we changed, for those of you who are older enough, and remember Larry Kurlander and Fred Buse and Andy Goldman and Midge Costanza, we actually put in a new Democratic Party here in Rochester. But the fact is that in the convention system, we nominated good people. We opened the process to money in 1970. Now, it's a fact. My great reform is not to go back to conventions and take power from the people, but we let money into politics. And it has been a horrendous ride. I can't tell you how disappointed I am on where we are in 2014 versus where I thought I was as a young activist like your leaders here of Metro Justice in 2014. So let's talk about what do we do. There's nothing more important than small donor financing. It empowers people. But more important, it elects a whole new breed of Collins and Torreses. Let's just look at what happened in New York City. Meet Carlos Menchaca, a product of public schools and public housing raised by a single mother who immigrated illegally from Mexico. The kid is incredible. You meet him, you know, you'd be inspired. And yet, we can't even get the Dream Act passed in Albany. Meet Danique Miller from Queens, a community and labor activist. She served as the president of Amalgamated Transport Union Local Number 1056, which represents drivers and mechanics who work for the MTA New York City Transit Queens bus system. I could go on and tell you about the new members of the New York City City Council. Brothers and sisters, they are exciting people. That's the type of people we need in Albany. That's the type of people we need as state senators. That's the nice people that we need as assemblymen. We don't have them. And our biggest obstacle is the old culture governor we have, Andrew Cuomo, who I will not support for re-election in 2014. This is a winnable fight. We are a great state. We are a state of enthusiasts and optimistic people. There's no reason for us to have to deal with what we're dealing in Albany today if we stand up and fight. And we must fight. Let's look at what our governor has done. I mean, it's appalling. In 2010, 2011, 2013, and 2014, he said he was for small donor elections, but yet did nothing about it. In 2014, he lied to us and told us he put it in the budget. Do you know what that means, put it in the budget? That means if you hold firm, it's done. That's what Patterson, by the way, I'll probably tip this over. That's what Patterson told us with his extenders. All Cuomo had to do was turn to Skelos and say, everything else in the budget is fine. I want fair elections. You don't pass it, then close down the government. He didn't have the courage to do it, and you know why? He's not for it. He's an old culture governor. He took $87,000 from David Koch. I mean, come on. $87,000. Now, I went to MIT with David. I know, you don't take $87,000 and be a progressive Democrat from David Koch. He took $37,000 in campaign contributions from Donald Trump. I mean, what was he thinking? He's taken 1,881 corporate donations. Now look, I'm a businessman. I love corporations. I just don't love politicians who give money and ask him for money. I just don't like corporations who give money to politicians. There's nothing wrong with corporations, but that's not Andrew Cuomo. He went through every single cement supplier, pavement supplier, electrician, plumbers, you name the contractor from New York State, and he solicited money. That is not a progressive governor. It's time we stand up and say enough. Now the worst thing he did is something called housekeeping. Now there is no Democratic Party. And it's no secret to those that know me well, I've become a big fan of the Working Families Party, which I view as the new Democratic Party. There's not even an office in New York City for the Democratic Party. There isn't. There's nothing there. He took $6 million in checks up to $1 million into the rebuild our great Democratic Party and then spent $5.3 on television ads promoting himself. He had the nerve to say to all of us, those aren't loopholes. That's the law. So it's time. We have to withdraw our support. The only way we can get what we want from Governor Cuomo is to tell him we're leaving him. We'll come back when he's progressive. We'll come back when he passes small donor financing. Don't think by telling him, we'll stay with you, I know you'll do it later, it's going to work. It won't work. I know. And let me give you a couple examples that most of you may not know. After Patterson and Spitzer so badly failed us, I decided to really do something different. We had to change our corrupt Democratic Party. Pedro Espada, Malcolm Smith, Sampson. I was finance chair. The only year we won. I brought in nothing but non-pay-to-play money. And what did they do? After Skelos took Espada, we took him back. I left the Democratic Party at that point. And I said to Cuomo, you want to be a great governor, we got to rebuild our own party. I'm a Democrat. Here's what he did. After I led an independent campaign to oust Pedro Espada, I went to a meeting with 20 people in it because I was an insider. I had supported Cuomo. My father ran for governor in '74 with Marios as lieutenant governor. And here's what I heard as I sat in those 20 people. Cuomo's person, September 2010. The Republicans are going to win the state Senate. What? I said, wait a minute, we can't pass progressive legislation. We can't pass independent redistricting. We can't pass campaign finance reform. What's he going to do? His representative. We will not lift a finger to elect a Democratic state Senate, and we won't spend $1 of our $1 million to elect one. I was there, I got up, I said, and left. This is, I'm telling you, a guy that's not on our side. Now, briefly, because, you know, Colin, I could talk till tomorrow morning. I'm so passionate about this. It's not just campaign finance reform where he's a hypocrite, okay? It's the DREAM Act. It's something called J-Scope, which is ethics. And it looks like a great committee till you read the fine print. Here's what the fine print says. There'll be 14 members of the Ethics Commission. They will meet in secret. And if they vote 12-2 not to investigate some fraud in the executive branch, but if Cuomo votes 2 of his 3 representatives not to do the investigation, it won't happen. In secret. Come on. That's not transparency. It's idiotic. That's who we have. Nothing but backroom deals. This same culture we've dealt with for years. The same thing just happened with Moreland. It just makes me sick in Moreland. Do you know what's wrong with Moreland? The Moreland Commission was about to investigate Cuomo's $6 million into housekeeping, was about to investigate, as I called Preet Bharara to do, his fundraising from every contractor that does business with New York State. He closed it down because he was afraid it was coming at him. So, what do? I'll tell you what I think we do. First, without even thinking twice, we have to urge the Working Families Party to put up a third-party candidate who maybe even runs in a primary against Andrew Cuomo. It's not that we will necessarily win, but we have to have a goal by 2018 to make New York great again. And you can't do it unless you fight. So let me just cover two very specific ideas that I would encourage Metro Justice to think about. I am very excited when I read in the fine print that you have appointed a new working committee on retirement security. Look, I'm 71. I get my, what do you call it, defined benefit pension. I know the exact day it comes in. I earned it. I have a lot of friends that have Tier 1. They earned it. I am sick and tired of the governor taking a tax on our pension systems, on our teachers, on our public employees, whose pensions, when added to Social Security, give them the dignity of retirement. Enough, Governor. But more importantly, why should we be on the defensive? In the New York City metropolitan area, 58% of the people have nothing. Nothing when they retire. So I will be announcing in detail on the 16th of this month, a brand new private pension system that I will urge Metro Justice and their Committee on Retirement Security to get behind. It's very simple, okay? Workers that work for small business, that work for fast food organizations, their small businesses will automatically enroll every worker in a new New York State private pension system. Now, you can opt out. But what that system does, like the union system, it pools their investments into a central statewide or citywide pool. Now you say, well, what's that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means $150,000 for every single couple who joins, because the administration fees of the union pension funds and of a pooled statewide or citywide trust are 60% lower than the 401ks that have failed the American workers, that failed in taking the responsibility from corporations and putting it on as workers. Now, besides the pooling concept, you get about 0.5% better return because you have the best investors in the world investing your money. Now, that part, which I'm working with SEIU International and NC Pairs, which is the Union Trade Association, is a piece of it. The goal is pensions for all. Here's how you do it. Yes, it's a dream. Yes, it's not doable yet. But for those of us that are going to fight in the trenches, it's our goal. One, when you put all this new $1 billion in a central fund, why don't we say to the fund, you invest the maximum of those New York worker dollars back in New York to create new jobs in New York, to finance infrastructure, not send it to Apple and a bunch of corporations all around the world. By creating New York workers, new jobs for New Yorkers, we increase revenue for our state or city, and the conclusion is we can then turn to those workers who don't earn enough money to put into the pension fund a new earned income tax credit where the state or the city puts 3% for every single worker into the retirement account, so every family has the dignity of being able to retire with dignity. Now, that is what Governor Cuomo doesn't even think about. He's not concerned with our workers. He's not concerned with anything but attacking our union brothers and sisters who do great work. Enough is enough. So let me finish with just one quick point that is dear to my heart, which is education. When I got out of law school, I turned down some investment bank. I formed a company to train workers 16 years old and up that lacked the reading and math skills to get and keep a job. There were 6 of us. We built that into a worldwide education company for workers. You know what? I'm tired of this yearly educational battles. We have a discriminatory education system in New York, end story. And working with AQE and Billy Easton, and if you don't know him, I suggest you do, he is a great leader, okay? We must have a bold approach, and let me tell you exactly what it is. Anyone here know who Pettibone Flowers is? Raise your hand. Oh, John. He was governor in 1894. From Watertown, a fellow upstate person. That is our Constitution on education. It was written in 1894. It is the core problem. It hasn't been adjusted for 120 years. As a result, in 1982, a good liberal court tried to interpret what those 1894 words meant, and they said sound and basic, what that meant. That court decision, if you read it, says, quote, there is no requirement in the New York State Constitution that we provide equal funding per student for education. Shocking. That's where we are today, even after the CFE lawsuit. As a result, what Cuomo doesn't tell you when he says he's the education governor, which he isn't, if you divide all our school districts into 4 social economic divisions, the poorest districts that are cutting foreign languages and AP courses get, out of the get-go, $8,614 $14,000 less. You start as a loser. Therefore, I am challenging Governor Cuomo. It's time, and our educational activists. We have to challenge that 1894 Constitution. We need to set a simple principle in New York. It's the following. Every student in every district at a minimum must receive equal funding around what is defined as the core curriculum. That's not enough. But where there is a persistent outcome that is unacceptable in a school district, the state, not the property tax, the state has the responsibility to define wraparound services. It's the only way you'll move poor kids, whether it be in Herkimer County or in Brooklyn, into the middle class. The governor doesn't tell you that. Instead, he puts on a 2% tax cap on educational funding, which is discriminatory. So my point to you is, it's time to fight. Don't let my fellow friends at the Working Families Party endorse Cuomo. I love him. But we must stand up with bold new visions, new ideas. There's no reason, we're New York, we can't do it. So let me finish with a very simple conclusion. You know I do not love Governor Cuomo, and I was a supporter in 2010. This isn't personal. This is because, as Saul Alinsky says, there comes a time where you gotta fight. And if you don't fight, you win nothing. So let me tell you one of his famous quotes. We must believe that it is the darkest before the dawn of a beautiful new world. We will see it when we believe it. Thank you and God bless.